There we are. Oh, good.
So make sure you're in the right place. This is Kicking the Tires, old school retail. Let's start with, if you do a search for future on Google, what do you think the first thing that pops up is? I'll tell you it's not native advertising. It's this guy. Does anyone know who this is?
It's the future.
This is the future. This is the future. Nevadius Cash. So hip-hop artist from Atlanta. Why are we starting with this? Starting with this, number one, we want to keep this panel fresh. So there'll be some surprises along the way. Number two is we're going to talk about the future. We're going to talk about the future of retail. We're going to talk about how programmatic connects with content. We're going to talk about what we're seeing in terms of opportunities for retailers, marketers, agencies, and the like. So let me introduce the panel. We'll start with Jen Kasper. Jen heads up digital marketing for Macy's. I consider her the foremost expert in omni-channel retail. We'll talk a bit about why I feel that. Jen, also a little known fact, like many of us, Jen admits to binge watching. She said she finished 4.5 seasons of Game of Thrones in 1 month. So, welcome, Jen.
Thank you.
Well done.
We've got John Gregory. John heads up the retail practice for AOL, former retail and agency exec. And little known fact about John, I asked John if he wasn't a successful executive, what would he be doing? And it was a surprise to me. He said he'd be a zookeeper.
It's kind of what I've done my entire
I was
career.
going to say, how is that so different?
Right. And then Mark Marinacci heads up sales for GeoDigital, former Google exec, many years of retail experience. And Mark and I are friends. I said to Mark, all right, so tell me something that I don't know about you. And Mark says that he told me that he is an avid player of Clash of Clans, which wasn't familiar with what that is, but it's a mobile game, and it's about collecting warriors and raiding villages. So I don't know what that says about Mark.
Undisclosed facts that are terribly embarrassing
Right.
and compromising, so thank you, friend.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm Jeff Fagel. I'm Chief Marketing Officer for GeoDigital, former retail CPG marketer at PepsiCo, Sears Holdings. A little known fact about me, I've been both in the backseat of a New York City cab with Reggie Jackson, as well as the backseat of Alex Rodriguez's Mercedes when he played for Seattle. So I guess perks of working for Gatorade. So let's get going. We're going to start with disruption. We're going to start with disruption on what we're seeing from both the consumer and the retail side. I'll start with Jen. So when you think about Macy's and you think about this disruption that's happening today within marketing and within consumers, how are you thinking about it and what does that mean?
So I think, we're a retailer who's 150 plus years old, and we got really good at understanding how to be a department store and how to offer our customers a broad, deep experience around value and assortments. And then along came the World Wide Web and turned everything upside down in terms of how consumers are shopping, how much information they have at their disposal, their adoption curve, that things may be ignored until all of a sudden they're embraced, and the expectation is that we have the full suite of offerings, whether it's in terms of the products that we carry, the services we provide, are all available when the customer gets to that moment of wanting them. And I would think, I'm sure it's been said multiple times this week already, nothing has been more disruptive in the shopping experience than the mobile device. And it took us a while to figure out how to embrace what a customer was already doing with a smartphone. We joke about how 5 or 8 years ago, we used to try and evaluate whether we had the capital to spend to put screens all over our stores. Could we afford to do that? And the customer beat us to it. And so how do we figure out how to whether serve her information or embrace the information she's creating herself, the content she's creating herself in our stores, and make that part of the shopping experience? And how are we encouraging it? How are we no longer afraid of the fact that she's checking prices? How do we make sure that as she checks a price in our store that she's getting not only the information about the best value at Macy's, and the best way to play the game with us in terms of using her coupons, but every piece of information about that product that we can give her, what the reviews are, what the specs are, and give her the opportunity, to really provide a full service. If she's sitting at home learning about that product, maybe she wants to pick it up in the store. Okay, we can do that. We buy online, pick up in store. And we're very close to also saying, if you're standing in a store and you want to buy that item, maybe in a size or a color that we don't have available, how do we take advantage of your demand and deliver that item directly to your store through your mobile phone? And instead of resisting the fact that these things are happening, really embracing them and making shopping easier.
John, what about you? Disruption.
Well, it's pretty much the same thing. We operate in a very disrupted media environment and marketing environment. And looking back 30 years ago when I started my retail career, as simple or as difficult as it seemed back then, it was very cookie cutter. We had direct mail, we had our newspaper ads, we had some radio, and maybe television if you could afford it. And even then, there weren't many national retail players, so television really wasn't that much of an issue. So. A lot of work, much more on the production side, I think, than anything. Well, a lot has changed since then, obviously, it's with all the screens we have to plan for now, and the content that has to be included in those screens, the loss of attention span from the consumer. I mean, there's a lot to deal with. It's a lot more complicated than it's ever been, and technology has really changed everything. It's changed the way consumers behave, and it's changed the consumption of media. And actually, what's on the screen now is something that was very important to me coming into AOL from having spent pretty much the majority of my career in traditional media and several years at a media agency working on a retail account. But this was a big aha to me in a major way. And this is a representation of the delivery of impressions over the course of a day, and this is based on, I think, 50 billion impressions from the ad.com network. So what was very interesting to me is to see how the different devices are an important part of the consumer, or at least the behavior throughout the day. In the morning, you have the smartphone as being the go-to device, which is much more of a utility. And in fact, I just spoke with one of our research people at AOL yesterday who said that based on a recent panel or poll, 85% of people don't even get out of their bed without touching their cell phone first thing in the morning, or their smartphone, which is very interesting. But then again, when I think of my own behavior, I pretty much sleep with my phone. So it's an obvious type of, it's an important part of the morning behavior. And throughout the day, it moves to the desktop, which is makes sense because it's a much more stable environment. People are multitasking, and I guess it competes with work to a certain degree, but we won't go there. And the big spike at the end of the day is with tablet usage, and much more around entertainment. So from a retail perspective, I look at this chart and I think, wow, what is the best message? Well, first of all, we should be at all these touch points. It's not a matter of just delivering in one place, direct mail or television or radio. It's about being everywhere, all present with the consumer. So in the morning, this would tell me that, wow, if I'm having a time-sensitive promotional event in the store, that might be the best time to reach a customer with that time-sensitive message. Throughout the day, based on the more transactional nature of the device, it's perhaps a better time to serve up coupons or more of a shopping type of environment, a shopping message, where toward the end of the day with that tablet device, it's really about the entertainment value, providing the content, the information, the experience around the brands. So, again, it's about, not putting all of your eggs in one basket. There is no silver bullet. Thankfully, I'm not on the client side these days to have to worry about the entire, media mix, because it's a very complicated thing to work with. It's just important, I think, to be in front of the customer as much as possible with whatever message is appropriate or native to the device that you're delivering. So it's about keeping that consistent conversation going throughout the day with the right message.
Mark, GeoDigital is part of the Gannett company. So marketing services business within a media publisher. How does that impact as you're thinking about disruption and what you do?
Yeah, so if you listen carefully to the challenge or the opportunity that a customer expresses, Jen being a great example, I think that for Gannett to think of itself in a disruptive fashion and to transform a value proposition and owned assets, it's to extend and say, yes, we want to serve with media, but we also want to stand up independent of that, a marketing services offering that can enable what we manage for Jen across any environment, John's included. So that's very disruptive after 100 years, about 150, to actually think differently about oneself and to do so deliberately and sort of eyes wide open, understanding that my value to Jen is greater than just media. Now it's media and marketing services. So I think that's a disruptive approach that Gannett's shown.
Let's move on to when we think about the consumer and how the consumer is different. They're different, but they're the same in many ways. So there was a stat that we came across that 90% of the time consumers shop within 3 to 5 miles from their home. So what are you, Mark, what are you seeing about these different but same consumers, and how are you thinking about it?
Yeah, so this is interesting, right? So I've never had a straight job. Since we're sharing personal facts about Clash of Clans, I would add to that I've never had any job other than an internet job. And the idea of changing screens, changing distribution, changing ways to reach and communicate with consumers has been something for 15 plus years that I've been involved in. But at the same time, when I sort of back up and understand how my wife and I live our lives and how we take care of our 3 girls, much of what we do while connected to the internet happens in a physical store. So we're either inspired by our kids or more often than not under duress. And we go to places around us to fulfill those desires and solve those problems. We might connect to a brand like Macy's to understand it through John's platform or others. But inevitably, if we want satisfaction, if we want something that's immediate, something that's tangible, we go and seek that out ourselves. And for now, in moments of duress, if Lucy has a fever of 104, not even Jeff Bezos can drone in children's Tylenol. So that's why 90% of the time, irrespective of how I find information, I act on it around me, at the corner of Happy and Healthy for Walgreens or at a Macy's store at Old Orchard.
Okay. Let's move on to omni-channel, cross-channel. When I chatted with Jen, I first met Jen about 3 years ago, we were talking about omni-channel retail and omni-channel communication. And what intrigued me was less about how Jen and Macy's were thinking about the communication. It was more about how they were thinking about the organization, the Macy's organization. So 1, aligning internally, 2, thinking about incentives and how the Macy's organization is structured. So ideally, it's breaking down silos internally to be able to be successful externally. So Jen, could you just talk a bit about the journey over the last few years when you're thinking about omni-channel communication, omni-channel, cross-channel success, what that journey has looked like and what you've learned?
Sure. I mean, for us, it's really centered around how the consumer is experiencing the world and how she's shopping. The label of omni-channel shopping is something that makes us sleep comfortably at night. Not a single consumer talks about being omni-channel. She's just shopping. And she's using all the tools at her disposal, and she wants things to be easy, and she wants technology to make her life cleaner and simpler and better informed. And so, and to be clear, the Macy's organization is still we're organized still in silos. We have a separate Macys.com organization from a separate, what we call Macy's Department Stores organization. What has changed so significantly over the last 3 or 4 years is the embrace that we've all put around the customer and the requirement that that imposes in terms of collaboration and shared incentives in terms of getting the customer the product that she's interested in whenever demand surfaces, that we have that supply in our inventory, that we get it to her. Our first investments were really in very unsexy, not marketing-oriented operational systems, where if Macy's owned inventory anywhere across our entire organization, whether it was living in a store or living in a warehouse, and a demand for it surfaced somewhere, we would figure out the most efficient way to get it to the consumer. And that took a lot of investment, a lot of technology, a lot of capital to build an inventory management system that could really maximize the products that we own. So that, a few years ago, we did a collection with Karl Lagerfeld. It sold out in a matter of days on Macy's.com, and we had plenty of it sitting in some of our stores. If that were to happen today, the demand coming through Macy's.com would be fulfilled out of our stores, and we wouldn't have been sitting with a potential markdown. So we knew that that was a huge opportunity. And to solve that first before we started communicating a service to our customers that we could provide. So we had to get the house in order before we had the housewarming party and started inviting people to use these services, whether it's through buy online, pick up in store, or through things that we enable through our mobile app.
And they did that in probably a matter of, 12 months or so?
About 18, yeah.
I mean, it's not such a simple thing. That's what there's so many complicated operational issues in the back office of retail that I don't think many shoppers obviously don't understand, but neither do, I think, publishers or the companies that you work with from a marketing perspective. So I think that's a huge challenge across the industry. And knowing from my own experience that retail it's all about the stores, it's about the customer-facing investments. So the idea of spending the necessary capital to develop those systems and the infrastructure to make that happen it's a tough thing to get approved and get moving.
Well, and the other component of it that's been a huge advantage, simultaneously as we're trying to become a more omni-channel retailer, we're also trying to be more locally relevant. And we have a strategy we talk quite a bit about called My Macy's. And My Macy's is really the sentiment that we hope people will have when they walk in the store that's 3 to 5 miles from them. And they walk in and they say, this is my Macy's. This is the Macy's that understands me in terms of assortments, in terms of the pricing, in terms of environment. Hopefully the people know me if I'm a regular shopper, and that there's an embrace of people. I think one of our huge advantages, particularly with the statistic that 90% of shopping is still being done in stores, is that we have these wonderful environments that have been our competitive strength for so many years, and how to leverage those and make them more personal, enable them with more technology, put more technology in the hand of our sales associates as well as our customer, so that shopping is easier and clearer, and that the experience is more seamless. But that the store itself is still something we're leveraging as a huge strength.
Let's talk about the seamless experience. There's another stat that we pulled that Deloitte recently predicted $1.5 trillion, or 50% of all in-store sales will be influenced by digital devices. So as we think about what that impact looks like and how do you connect along the consumer's purchase journey, it would be great for us to show a few examples. I mean, you talked about My Macy's, we've talked about kind of the localization, what you've partnered with AOL on, what that looks like. So John and Jen, if you could kind of walk us through, we've got a few examples that we'll show.
The program we actually launched with Macy's earlier this year was really, it's about addressing the changes in the marketplace, really. And there's a huge investment for retailers in print media, circulars, direct mail, and so forth. And AOL recognizes that the consumer behavior is changing, and changes in media are a result. In this case, the newspaper industry has been losing audience for years. And for that reason, there's a loss of reach in the marketplace with a very important vehicle for the retailers, over the past 5-10 years. And it's reaching a point where those under 40 don't even really pay that much attention to newspapers like in past generations. So we thought there was a need to address the Sunday circular, and we developed an ad unit, a dynamic ad unit that essentially takes the experience of that printed circular and extends it into a digital environment and creates an engaging experience that can be delivered, across device to on great scale, same scale as would be for the newspaper, and try to reinforce the delivery of that printed piece. We're not talking about replacing anything, and I think that's probably a mistake that maybe a lot of digital publishers make, that there's a very important place for television, direct mail, print, radio, they all play a very important part of the puzzle. But you have to recognize changes in the media landscape, and this was one of the changes that we felt was needed to be addressed, and for that reason, we developed this ad unit that really provides that experience through a digital ad unit. So I think you have the demo here. If you could forward. There you go. So this is an ad unit that was the Macy's placement here. If you roll over it, it expands into a, we can't see it here. Well, essentially, the ad unit is an expandable ad unit. And it expands to show the same breadth of selection and prices and items that we'd see in a Sunday circular. And the beauty of this ad unit is that it supplements that printed piece not only on Sunday, but throughout the entire life of the circular as it's being distributed in the marketplace. So it acts as a supplement, not a replacement, but a supplement, a support device that reaches audiences that would otherwise not be reached through the Sunday circular. And it can provide as much or little product as you want to include from that circular. It can be tailored to a particular market based on product availability, my Macy's, keeping that in mind. And it's immune to weather, which is, for me, was a very important issue during my days in retail. There are many times, I mean, just recently in the last 5 years, where I had to deal with the loss of delivery of an insert in the Northeast during a very important time of the year. It was during Thanksgiving week, by the way. So having something like this in place allows you to heavy up when it's necessary due to weather or things that would prevent the printed piece from being delivered, but it also tailors a different type of engagement with the customer. And included in this ad unit, you could have content around the product. You can include video. You can include as many bells as whistles as you think would be appropriate to accompany this printed piece.
And we have the luxury at Macy's of having the resources in our media budget to be in newspaper and to be online and to be on TV. Not every advertiser has that benefit, and we're fortunate that we can, we have the means to reach people. But, as John mentioned, people's consumption, whether it's a function of preference for a screen or less time to spend reading a physical newspaper, we're very enthusiastic about taking the assets that we've already developed and leveraging them elsewhere. We aren't producing a separate piece of content. We are leveraging existing content. It's one of the requirements that we have to delve into these sorts of things. Another advantage of our relationship with AOL and is something, as we go into the digital space, there are two things that we can do in the digital world that we can't do in print, which are that we can target with much greater precision, and we can measure results very differently, both online and offline. And the extension of our partnership with AOL that I think the consumer's not aware of, but it's something that we see in terms of delivering more efficiency, is having partnered with Acxiom. AOL, Macy's, we both have a lot of data about our consumers. I have insight into roughly 70% of the transactions that happen at Macy's. John obviously has a huge user base through AOL. We've partnered with Acxiom to pair and match our data in a PII compliant way, in a safe haven, where now I can say, hey, John, not only do I want to run an ad unit like this, but I want to target known customers. And I want to target known customers who have a propensity to shop during this gift-giving period. And I can eliminate the waste of the people who are considerably less likely to respond to this ad unit and go straight to the people who are more likely to respond. And then, because we've done this through Acxiom, I can measure not only the impact that this ad buy has on online sales. That's great. We love that. It's a huge part of our business. But I think the other huge advantage of this methodology is that we can measure offline sales. And 3 years ago, 3 years from now, we'll sit at Ad Week and we'll talk about full media attribution. We'll all pat ourselves on the back. But right now, we're having to hack into ways that we can prove that this investment is driving.
What have you learned
offline.
so far?
Right.
In terms of just overarching results, obviously not getting into specifics, but what have you learned so far from online or mobile to in-store?
Obviously, there's a huge, huge influence factor. It's consistent with what we see in terms of sales. So, all of it is logically what it should be, and we'll continue to invest in more and more of these campaigns, in part because they're more efficient, and in part because we can see how they're driving sales.
And keeping in mind that the delivery of this unit is meant to replicate the same reach and scale as the newspaper, so it's meant to have broad reach in the marketplace, which AOL luckily can deliver through
lookalikes,
and through our network alone. So it's not only AOL owned and operated properties we're delivering this to, but it's the network at large through all of our 5,000 plus publishing partners. So we have the reach to really to extend that newspaper distribution in a very powerful way.
So I think that's interesting because when you hear a lot about local marketing, often what comes up are like the bright and shiny objects of beacons and geolocation and iPayments, and maybe that's going to scale in the future. But what I hear you speaking to is how do you take existing assets, how do you leverage those assets and think about them less as the circular but more as relevant content that can drive in-store local outcome. Because realistically, there's no such thing as a national customer, right? So, I mean, one of the things that I found interesting in talking with John was this idea of the 7 days of Sunday, which if you could talk a bit about kind of what that looks like and what you were thinking there, and then kind of how that kind of interacts with the relationship that you have with Mark and then also with Jen.
Well, I mean, what fuels this ad unit is the existing assets, as you said, that are provided through GeoDigital. It's all the product feed. So this ad unit that expands into all these products and items and prices that you can essentially page through as you would for the printed circular, it's the same way, is provided through GeoDigital's relationship with Macy. So it's the combination of these partnerships and the use of the existing assets that makes this a possibility.
Anything else to expand on that, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jen hit it on the head, right? People don't talk about omni-channel. They talk about shopping. Similarly, my wife's never talked about APIs and feeds, nor has she discussed programmatic distribution and smart owned and operated assets that John controls at AOL. But what she does talk about is personal experiences and things that matter. And I think that it's a yes and. Yes, we need to leverage data to recognize her, know her, and reach out to her. And now that that capability is there, what is it that you're going to choose to say? Mm-hmm. So surely if you know that it's raining, surely if you know that I have 3 girls, not 3 boys, that would change the message set, the offer set, the value proposition. And I think when you combine smart media and smart content to drive personalization, you realize that a retailer with the sort of breadth of Macy's has many, many more brand attributes than maybe they even know. Because that one thing at that one moment is what my wife needs most. And in so much as we can satisfy that demand, that's what being a merchant's really about.
So I'm going to throw an idea out here for the group here. The future of marketing. So how do we feel about the future of marketing is programmatic buying connecting with programmatic content? So programmatic buying connecting with programmatic content. We heard a lot over the last few days about programmatic, making things more efficient, being able to target. How do we connect? It's one thing to be more efficient, it's another thing to find somebody, let's say a mother who takes yoga 3 times a week, she's left-handed, she lives in Seattle. What are you gonna say to her? How are you gonna make whatever, once you reach her, how are you gonna make that relevant? Do we feel like the content piece, we've been so focused on the programmatic piece, the DSPs, DMPs, and we've lost track of the creative and the content and the messaging?
Well, I think it's really about having the contents that's most relevant to that customer you're talking about. I mean, the data makes that possible. It's how you use the data that really fuels the programmatic and the dynamic, the optimization of creative for each of the ad units you're delivering. So it's really about the use of data that makes programmatic the powerful tool that it's becoming and will become, in the future.
If buying in a way that we would coin as programmatic is about scale and efficiency, it doesn't absolve us of incorporating a human element to what we're doing. And I think the creative expression is so often the indication that there's a human behind this. Someone has given thought not only to the quality of the picture or the sentiment in the words, but there have been choices about, that may be informed by insights that come out of data, but there's still got to be a human component for things, for a human to go shopping, We don't have robots shopping in our stores. I have never seen a laptop come up to a point of sale and make a purchase. And so to think that we're still communicating with people and that there's a soul to it, I think it's part of what explains the surge and inclination for people to integrate social experiences into their digital lives, is because they still yearn for human connections. They still want things to feel real, and they want, you know, as much as it's highly produced photography, it's also user-generated photography. As much as it's a customer review where it's a human saying, it's us providing content about a product. And I think, you know, the screen enables connections, but it doesn't replace the part of this that has still got to be about people connecting with each other.
Can't forget that shopping is a social, you know, social interaction. And you know, I was taught very early on and during my days at Bloomingdale's from Mike Gould and his predecessors that it's a form of entertainment, and we have to make it that way. So in the old days, it was about having, you know, trunk shows and fashion shows and experiences in the store that really drew traffic into the store. But you can do the same types of things with digital technology. It's just that you have to make that same type of engaging experience that's relevant to that customer. So it's as every bit as creative as it has been in the past. It's just about making the best use of those elements. And you know, bottom line, you could be the most technologically innovative retailer in the world and still not be successful. I mean, it still comes back to the products that you're offering in the store. So if the merchants and the store itself is making the wrong selections or taking the wrong course of action from a merchandising standpoint or a brand standpoint, the most incredible marketing in the world is not going to help that. So there's a lot of, you know, a lot of things that come into play in retail that impact that shopping experience.
There's a quote by Rashad Tabakawala, chairman, publicist, sage, definitely a trendsetter, where he talked about marketing is moving from wholesale spraying to custom hand-holding, focus on the poetry of the interaction and not just the plumbing of the delivery. So, you know, moving from the pipes to maybe replacing poetry, maybe that's too strong with creative or content. I know Mark knows Rashad well. What do you make of what he has said? Because I know you've talked to him a few times about this specifically. Yeah,
Rashad is a wise guy and somebody from whom I seek advice pretty often. And if you sort of think about poetry, there's all sorts of different forms of it in the canon. You could have a limerick, you could have a sonnet. So similarly, content is expansive. It's a word that we use at GeoDigital deliberately in broad fashion because content encompasses for us all of the things that Jen wants to talk to my wife about across a number of different need states, seasons, weeks, etc. So thinking about, you know, as strides have been made to increasingly use data, owned or licensed, to inform the impression. Similarly, what we're now seeing is deliberate strides being made to say, having made that investment, I now need to solve for what is it that I'm going to choose to say. So if you think about it in the context of Macy's, that's one thing. If you think about it for brands, my wife knows that Tide gets stains out. She's well aware. But there's so much more that a Procter & Gamble can talk about, right? So whether it's a retailer, whether it's a consumer packaged goods company, I think given this fact that, you know, 3 to 5 miles from the home is where commerce happens, and sure, it shows up at a box sometimes from Seattle, sure, but a lot of times it's happening in Evanston, Illinois, where I live. I think that's what we have to solve for. So it's thinking about, now that the plumbing is there, the pipes are there, what is it that you're going to choose to say? Because ultimately that's the interaction that drives personalization, and it's not one for the other. Again, it's a yes and, right? It's smart distribution meets agile content to drive personalization and the magic of, say, Macy's.
At the same time, I mean, personalization should only go so far, and it has to be, you know, done in a way that's right for the shopping environment. I mean, part of shopping is really about exploring and discovery. So it's possible, I guess, to over-personalize things, to only deliver people that exact thing that you know they're looking for because of the data, because of all the information you have about their behaviors online. So, you know, you have to, you know, make sure that the vehicle that's being delivered can actually create that experience that's relevant to the customer. In this case, it's about that breadth of information, items and prices, and the printed piece. For a more branded effort, it could be a video, and even thinking like about iBeacon technology, which I think is like a, you know, really hot topic right now in stores. Assuming the customer opts into the application, I mean, how is that best used in the store? I mean, if you engage once during that shopping environment, it might be a positive outcome. But if you do, if you hit that person twice or 3 times and you keep, interrupting their experience in the store, it could be a very bad thing. So it's about how you really use the technology to best deal with that customer. And what you would do with iBeacon technology in Macy's would be very different than how you would use it in Walmart or Bergdorf Goodman. It's really about the specific application that's most relevant to your brand.
Right. We find that our customers are still looking for advice and authority and a point of view. And as much as that can be expressed as a recommendation engine, some sort of data feed, there's still something about, look at the proliferation of how-to videos on YouTube. We still want people to tell us how to do things better, whether it's applying makeup or styling hair, putting outfits together, or choosing the items for a gift registry. That notion of authority, I think, is something that Macy's has earned over 150 years. And whether it's the individuals who work in our store or the aggregation of a lot of content over time, figuring out how to leverage those moments where a consumer is really seeking advice and take advantage of those as a means to connect and to offer a service, in addition to saying, here's the right price and here's the coupon to apply to it.
So speaking of that, Mark, I know you brought an example of how you would take an existing asset, so existing television ad as an example, and take that and be able to scale it locally and kind of what that looks like. So maybe if you could walk us through what we're going to see here.
Sure. Yeah, so thinking about geodigital as a service that we offer to retailers like Macy's, what we're thinking about now is, what are all the places where we can enable this content to inform a consumer given a different need state, right? So clear intent, serendipity, browse, inspiration, regardless. I think what we're trying to figure out here is, again, now that, we're sort of coming back to this grounded place that says commerce happens around the home, and we have this corpus of information that allows for both specific information retrieval and or sort of collections of things to be inspired, called a weekly ad. What else could we do with it, right? And this is a really interesting piece, right? So this is 2 old school marketing assets coming together to drive personalization, and would want to give a plug to a company here in New York called iView, who we work with to do this. So what you're going to see is essentially a 30-second spot from Procter & Gamble talking about Crest. And you're going to see that core content asset that geodigital manages, the Walmart tab, informing at the impression level where to go find these products. So this is sort of the digital version of find it in your grocer's freezer. So if we roll this, you'll see exactly what I mean.
For a brilliant smile, there's a breakthrough in whitening. From Crest 3D White, new Brilliance Toothpaste and Boost. After brushing, our exclusive Boost polishes your smile and whitens with 3 times the stain-lifting ingredient for a smile that dazzles. New Crest 3D White Brilliance.
Take advantage of these limited time deals on Crest products, available only this week and only at your local Walmart. Click here to shop now and get more great savings. Drop by your local Walmart today.
So this is combining, what Procter would talk about as a reason to believe with a reason to act. And again, it's a yes and, right? It's an inspiring message that builds brand equity and tells my wife where to go and get it now. So that's one specific use case. There are many others. And of course, Walmart is not Macy's. But thinking about interesting and new applications of this content asset that tie to really smart media, John's or others, is I think what comes together to best serve Jen and folks in her chair.
So one last question, and we'll offer it up to the group here for questions. Same-day delivery. Jen, will it scale by 2016?
Honestly, I don't know. I think we need to wait and see how our customer responds to it. I think same-day delivery from different retailers. When you need Tylenol at 4 in the morning, your need state around same-day delivery is different than a pair of shoes. And so I think for Macy's, we're testing it. We're testing a lot of different services that make our customers' lives easier. And we'll wait and see how much more investment is appropriate in that service versus all the other things that we're considering. Obviously, we need to make sure that it's something that the customer is demanding from us before we go much deeper than we have already.
Okay.
I think Jen hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's really about the testing and learning. I mean, there's so much going on that it's not about doing a full fleet execution of an idea anymore. It's about testing it, optimizing it, and then spreading it out to as many locations as makes sense. And early adopters win. And I think it's important for retailers, which is historically a conservative type of industry, to start pushing ahead. And I think Macy's has done a great job of that. There are others, Nordstrom's, Williams-Sonoma. There are a few that are really doing a good job of pushing ahead with technology. But I think the industry needs to catch up with a lot of other industries.
So we have about 5 minutes. We'll offer it up for questions. There's a gentleman over here with a mic, if anyone has any questions. Right over here, third row.
Yeah, my question is a little bit around the consumer. It's kind of two parts. First, as consumers are gaining more and more knowledge online and coming into the store to still shop 90% of the time, what are the things you're doing to kind of empower the associates as well as that in-store experience to keep up with that consumer knowledge? And how are people still considering their purchase once they walk into the store? Or are their minds made up and they know exactly what they want when they actually walk into the store?
I think it's all of those things. To answer the second part of your question first, every customer walks into one of our Macy's stores with a different intent, with a different scenario, a different price that she finds appealing, probably looking for a different item. Her reasons for coming are different. The amount of time she has to linger is different. Some people are coming in to pick something up that they've bought on Macys.com, and our hope is obviously that something else will catch their eye and they'll add more to their basket. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes she has 3 daughters in tow and all she can do is get herself back to the car. I think for us it's about building that relationship over time and accommodating her based on her need state at the moment. Our best customers, we're not a Walmart or a Target where someone is in once a week. We're happy and thrilled when a customer is in with us once a month. And so figuring out how in that once a month trip that she's making to Macy's, how to make that as rich an experience and as accommodating to what her need state is at the moment. Now, the first part of your question around equipping our sales associates with technology, there was a point not so long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, where our sales associates were petrified that the customers were coming in as informed as they were, and that Macys.com would be taking sales out of their pocket. Our most valuable customer by a significant margin is a customer who is shopping with us in both channels. She's discovering products on Macys.com, she's researching her mattress, she's taken a look at all the lipstick shades that we have, and then she comes into our store. Or vice versa, she's come to our store to browse, but she doesn't feel like making the purchase until she gets back home. That is awesome because it's the most valuable customer to us in total. Lifetime customer value, and really educating our sales associates to take advantage of that, to foster that behavior. In some of our departments, the Herald Square Shoe Department is a great example of where we're leveraging actual handheld technology to foster a more efficient purchase. But even still, we haven't gone so far as to roll that out across the enterprise. We know that our sales associates themselves are spending more time learning about products they sell on Macys.com, are often pulling their own phones out of their pockets to help customers shop more intelligently, and are certainly working with our customers to facilitate scanning, to facilitate the kinds of things, using mobile coupons, where we've seen exponential growth in terms of consumers' use, some of it prompted by their own behavior, some of it because our associates are now encouraging them to do it.
Looks like we have another question, a few questions over here.
Thanks very much. Very interesting panel. I have a question for both Macy's and Gannett with your historic print hat on. Can you opine on the future of the freestanding insert in print in newspapers as a medium that works for you, that you spend meaningful money on or make profit from in the case of Gannett?
Why don't I get that question? I would love to.
Yeah, so I think to share with you my context into your question, I would have to be honest and tell you that it's limited. So there's a reason that we have created an independent marketing services organization that can stand alone from the owned and operated media. I think that the reality of the print marketplace is widely known. I think it also retains its value. for a certain segment of your customer base. Whether it's Macy's or other retailers, I haven't had anyone say yet, let's take everything out of this and put it into that. If you recall Indiana Jones in the opening scene when he took the bag of sand and the gold sort of statue, he swapped them out very quickly and then the temple came down. So what John and I are working on together to solve this challenge for Macy's is not to turn it off and turn everything digital on. It's rather create optionality and choice so that before she's forced to, Jen can understand how to take the same promotional content that my wife needs into a variety of channels rather than one. So I hope that's a fair answer for somebody who actually has a limited view on the media side of it.
Well, and by the way, this program doesn't only apply to the newspaper or circular industry either. I mean, it has an incredible application for direct mail for very different reasons. The expense of postage and production and the limited distribution because of those costs. I mean, you could take that same content with a different version of this ad unit and broaden your audience substantially at a much lower cost than you could ever do with the direct mail piece.
And I think the thing that we continue to love about a printed piece of information is that it can sit and be present in a home, the home that chooses to subscribe to the paper, the home that picks it up at the newsstand, I mean, really subscription-based, where something in the digital world is fleeting. If someone decides to click away from the homepage of Stylist and they haven't engaged with my ad, whoop, there goes my opportunity to give them something really rich and deep. Whereas the print piece, whether it's delivered through direct mail or through a newspaper as an insert, is something that's tangible and is relatively permanent for a span of time that we, in our events being sometimes 1 to 5 days long, we're okay with that there's something tangible that the consumer who's interested in that delivery mechanism can still learn about our products and our pricing. Macy's still does a very robust business with the boomer population. And we have found that direct mail and newspaper, in particular with an older consumer, is a key part of our mix. And it's not something we'll walk away from.
I think the important thing to realize also is that customers are always on. So whether it be through a digital form of this execution or the printed piece or a television ad saying one-day sale, it's about the combination, the collective importance of all of those elements that really lead to the success in the marketplace. And our AOL's own research tells us that the more people are exploring, are always on, looking at brands and things, the more predisposed they are to actually specific brands when they are ready to make that transaction. So always being present with the customer is very helpful to bring a different level of elevation to your brand.
Looks like we have time for 1 or 2 more.
Great. Adam Kleinberg from Traction. There was just a Gartner report that said that came out that said I think 90% of brands say they're going to compete on customer experience in the next 2 years, which kind of echoes Rashad's quote that you put about poetry and the experience, right? From this panel's perspective, there's a lot of talk in terms of like omni-channel merchandising. How are you selling what you're selling in a different way? But really what seems to be missing from the conversation is disruption, right? Like if I were working for Macy's right now, I'd look at the Trunk Club being sold to Nordstrom, and that would be keeping me up at night. And you've talked a lot about context, and Macy's has a context to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So as you look at not just merchandising in a better way in a changing world, when you think about how do you disrupt your own business before it gets disrupted, do you think that you can do that with the Macy's brand? Or do you need to create a sub-brand or go beyond that?
I'll text you at 4 in the morning when I'm awake thinking about Trunk Club. Thank you, and I am. We're doing things that we think are true to our DNA. Macy's, as much as it's a retail brand and we invest in the theater of shopping, we also think we have permission to be an entertainment brand. It starts with the Thanksgiving Day parade. Thank God for the people who made that decision 87 years ago. We have the license to be in the entertainment space. And I'll refer to 2 examples that we have tested and are really enthusiastic about, our piece in them over the last couple of years. One is a show that NBC did called Fashion Star, and we were participants in 2 seasons of it. It was a designer competition show during prime time, and the thing that was different about that show and why Macy's participated is that the designs that were featured on that show could be purchased in real time on Macys.com at the time that that show aired. That piece for us of being part of a piece of primetime content on a huge broadcast network and to make it shoppable was something for us that was a huge win. Did the show get the best ratings? Maybe not. Did it have a huge audience? No. But we met and exceeded all of our goals in terms of driving business in this way that was about integrating into content. Similarly, a few weeks ago, we partnered with 3 Lions to be part of Fashion Rocks. Huge music event at the Barclays Center, and we were able to integrate all the product that was featured in that show as a fashion show came from Macy's. They styled it how they wanted to style it. We made it available to the audience who was watching it on CBS and to the people who were live in person through the integration with Shazam and our own website where people could shop what was on that runway. You know, when they did Fashion Rocks 5 years ago, when Richard Beckman brought that to stage, you couldn't shop what you were seeing. And our place in an event like that is to make it shoppable and to make it desirable and to connect with entertainment properties. I think that's the kind of thing you'll start seeing more from us. It'll happen in the digital world. We're doing a lot with YouTube stars. We're doing a lot of our own content that we're publishing that's shoppable. But it's also about being part of pop culture and making those moments shoppable when it's appropriate.
Being true to your brand.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, what a Nordstrom would do. They're being true to their brand, and I admire it tremendously. I think Macy's will do the things that make us unique in the marketplace.
Jen, John, Mark, thank you. And for all of you, if anyone's interested in the slides, stop by, drop off a card. I'll be happy to send you the slides. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.